Hi everyone and welcome to today's video. So have you ever wondered how you can create an interactive selection menu in Figma? That's what I want to show you today. So as you can see, when I actually select this, you can actually see that this actually becomes active. So when I actually deselect it, it actually becomes inactive. And as you can see, select one, it becomes active. Select more than one, so it actually doesn't matter. And when a user actually does that, you can actually apply. And as you can see also, if none of them is actually active, a user can actually not apply. So how do we do this in Figma? Find out in today's video. Alright, so now we're going to work on our interactive selection menu. But now to begin with, you can actually see I have two frames already that I've actually already created. So this is frame 1 and this is frame 2. So frame 1 is where we're actually going to have the checkboxes and where a user can actually click and sign or apply. And then this is frame 2 that will show when a user has actually applied successfully. Alright, so now let's first insert our checkboxes. So now let's right click, go to your plugins, then search for Iconify plugin and then search for checkbox. Now inside checkbox, I'm actually going to look for different ones. Now for me, I actually want those that are 24 by 24. So now this is what I'm going to be using for the checked version. So this is like in option 3. So this is what I'll use. Then drag it to your artboard. And then we're going to go back to second one. And then this is actually what I'm looking for. But now I want something thicker. So this is what I'm going to use. So this is in the second category. So now that I have those, I actually can now close that. So now let's look at these two. Let's drag them onto our frame. Now as you can see, they actually come when they're actually inside frames, like as you can see right here, but I don't want them to actually be inside those frames. So now I'm going to drag them out so I can actually easily work with them. So actually I only need them to be in vector form, then delete these frames. So now I'm going to call this the checked version. So call it checked. We're going to call this one the unchecked. Right, so now that we have that, we're actually going to give this one a color. So let's give this checked version a color. So I'm going to give it a certain purple color that I already have. So 7F 0D F2. Alright, so now that we have it that way, now we're actually going to group them together. But first of all, I actually want to make sure that this checked version is on top of the unchecked version. So as you can see right there, let's actually spell this well. So I've actually misspelled that. Alright, so now we can group them. So let's group these, group selection, then call this group checkbox. And then next, we're actually going to select that checkbox and then we're going to increase the dimensions. So let's increase the dimensions of the group to 32 by 32. Alright, so now that is better. So actually I wanted it to be that much bigger. So there we go. Alright, so next we're going to list the languages. So the first language shall be English. Then we're actually going to give this size of 20. Then we're actually going to change the font. Let's change it to Montserrat. Okay, so there we go. Montserrat size 20. And then I actually want this to be regular. Alright, so there we go. So now we're going to actually place these together. So there we go now. Alright, so now we're going to duplicate this. So click Alt on your keyboard, then space them. One space 9 by 27, which will be okay. Then the next language shall be Mandarin, or some of that call Chinese. Then we're going to duplicate this again. Alright, so now we're going to type in the next language, which shall be Portuguese. Then lastly, we're going to actually have the fourth language. Then we're going to have French. Alright, so there we go. So next, I want buttons that I can actually click on for a user to apply or to cancel. So now that's what I'm going to work on next. Alright, so I'm going to select a rectangle right here and then I'm going to give it dimensions. So I'm going to give it dimensions of width 143 and then I'm going to give it a height of 49. Alright, that will do. Then let's give it a curve radius or border radius of 25. Alright, so next I'm actually going to give this a color. So I'm going to give it the same color purple as we have right here. Let's give it a purple color. Then we're actually going to duplicate this text right here. Then we're going to type in the text for it. So the text is going to be apply. Then we're going to place this right at the top. So rearrange, bring this to front, There we go. Let's give this a white color. So more like that. So actually let's give this a medium size, as you can see right there. Then we're going to change the font size to 15. So there we go. So that's it for the apply. Then we're going to duplicate this and place it right next to it. Then we're going to change the text here to cancel. Alright, so we're going to change this purple color. We're going to give it another color. So the coordinate shall be EF. So it's a form of gray. EFBF3. Alright, so there we go. Then let's make this black. Alright, so that's more like it. Make sure that they are aligned together. Alright, so there we go. Let's place these next to that. There we go. Alright, so next I'm actually going to duplicate this. So I'm going to have two versions of this word for apply. So now duplicate that, and there we go. And then next I'm actually going to have a form to actually represent it when it is actually inactive. So whenever it is active, we'll actually have it being purple and the text being white, as you can see right there. So when it's inactive, I'm actually going to change the color right here. So this is going to be different. So this is going to be, so let's give it a dull gray. So it's going to be with the coordinates EA, EA, EA. Alright, so more like that. And then we're going to change the text color here. So this shall have the coordinates 979393. Alright, so next I'm actually going to group these. So group this and call this group inactive. And then we're going to group these also, and we're going to call them active. Right, so there we go. So now the next thing is actually want to make sure that the active is actually laid over the inactive. So that's what we're going to do. So now place them over each other like that. But actually make sure that the active is on top of the inactive. So there we go. Then we're going to group these together again. So let's give this, group these, and then we're going to call this group apply. So there we go. So place this back right there. So and basically we have our design for the first page. So now next I'm actually going to duplicate this cancel. Then I'm actually going to place this right here. So Alt on your keyboard and then duplicate it and place it right here. So this is going to give us an option to go back once the user goes into this main page. So select this and actually align to center. Alright, so the next step shall be first to create our local variable. So now when we click out, we can actually see that we actually have this menu for local variables. So let's create our local variable. So what happens is we're going to have a variable for each different checkbox, as you can see right here. Then we're also going to have one for this apply button. So we're going to create different buttons, but all of them will actually have the boolean. Alright, so we're going to have the first variable. So the first variable shall be checkbox 1. So this is going to be the very first one to represent this one. So now let's create another one. So we're going to duplicate this. Then we're going to call this checkbox 2. Duplicate this. Then we have checkbox 3. Duplicate this. Then we have checkbox 4. Alright, so now we have a variable for each of the different checkboxes. Now make sure that each one of them is set to false. So lastly, we're going to have to create one for this. So duplicate this again. Then we're going to call this apply. So now we have all the variables that we shall need. Alright, so the next step shall be to assign variables to each of the different checkboxes. But now I actually want these ones to all be renamed in a unique way. So to make sure that they're actually all different, let's call this checkbox 2. This is our checkbox 3, and lastly this is our checkbox 4. Alright, so now that we've actually renamed each of these, we can actually select checkbox 1 and then click on the drop down. Then remember we actually had the two different checkboxes. So now on the one that is checked, we're actually going to assign the variable to it. So now go to the pass through here, and then where there is this eye, right click on your mouse, and then we're going to assign to it checkbox, the variable checkbox 1. So now that's what we have. So now it's going to be invisible in that case because that variable is set to false. So now we're going to go to checkbox 2 also, and then go to where we have the checked menu. Then we're also going to go to the pass through, then assign the variable of checkbox 2. Then go to checkbox 3. Then we're also going to assign the variable for checkbox 3. Then go to the checked version for checkbox 4. And then we're also going to assign the variable for checkbox 4. So now the only reason why you can actually see that the checked versions are actually made invisible is because the variables are all set to false. And because that is Boolean, it actually means that they will not be visible in the first state that we actually designed. Alright, so now next we're actually going to assign the variable also to this apply part light right here. So now where there is active, we're actually going to assign a variable. So now we're going to go to where we have the layer pass through also, then right click, then we're going to assign the apply. And as you can see, the active part also becomes invisible, and what we're left with is the inactive. And as you can see also in the remaining checkboxes, what we are left with is the unchecked parts. Now that we're done with assigning the variables, we're actually now ready to prototype. So now we're going to begin with this checkbox 1. So make sure it's selected. So go to the prototype mode, and then we're going to add an interaction. Now make sure this is set to on tap, and then next we're actually going to set a condition. Now the reason for the condition is we want to make sure this value here only becomes checked if the original value was actually unchecked. So having that selected, we're going to actually select checkbox 1. So we're going to select that variable to actually assign checkbox 1, and then we're going to make sure that this is actually false for it to be checked. So make sure that is set to false. Alright, so when we determine that actually that is actually set to false, we can actually now set it to true. So we're going to set the variable of that checkbox 1 to true, and that's what we'll have. Alright, so let's test that. Let's preview that, and as you can see, it will actually check. But now what happens is we can actually not unchecked, so let's actually work on that. Alright, so for that to work, we actually have to set the else. So now we're going to set the variable for checkbox 1, and then make sure that is set to false. And then when we do that, we can actually close. Then let's preview that again, and as you can see, when I actually uncheck it, it actually goes off. But now we don't have this becoming active, so now that's what we actually want to work on next. Alright, so next, go back to your initial condition for this checkbox 1, and then open it again. Then we're going to add something else. So we're going to add another set variable. So we're going to set the variable. Let's drag this to the top. So we're going to set another variable. So now that variable shall be for this apply. So actually we're going to have to set that to true. And then make sure that this is actually under this condition, because this condition here must also be satisfied before this is actually set to true. So we're going to select this. Then we're going to drag it into this section right here. So this must be true. So for it to be set on, the checkbox 1 must first of all be checked, and then that will actually happen. So now let's try that again. So when you close that, as you can see, when I click on this, it actually becomes active. But now as you can see, when I actually uncheck it, it actually remains active. And now that is something that I actually want to avoid. But now in that case, we actually have to be careful. And why is that? It's because in case any one of these other checkboxes is still checked, this should actually remain active. But now let's work on that. Now let's go back to this checkbox 1 right here, and then we're going to add another condition. So we're going to add a different condition. So in the different condition, we actually want to make sure that the only reason why this will actually become inactive or unchecked again is when everything else is set to false. So in case checkbox 1 is equal to false, and we have to make sure checkbox 2 is also set to false, and we also want to make sure checkbox 3 is also set to false. And then lastly, we also want to make sure that checkbox 4 is also set to false. So in case all of them are actually set to false, click enter. Now we can actually set that variable to false. So we can actually set the apply to false. So now all the other conditions must be true. And then in case none of this is actually set to false, or in case any one of them is checked, we actually make sure that the apply should actually be set to true. So now let's drag this to the top, and then we're going to add the target variable. So the variable is for apply, then set that to true. So in case any one of them is checked, this will actually be set to true. So let's try it again. Let's preview that again. So now when I click on this and uncheck, you can actually say it actually vanishes. So now let's work on the other different variables, because we can now not yet uncheck the other variables or check them. Now let's do that. Alright, so we're going to go to checkbox 2 right here, and then we're actually going to set the same condition. So let's add another condition. So we're going to add a condition right here. Then we want to make sure that this should actually have also been false. So click checkbox 2, then make sure that it was actually set to false before we can actually check it. Then we're going to add the different actions. So we're going to set the variable of that checkbox 2 to true once the user clicks on it. Then we also have to make sure that now it can also set the variable for the apply. It should actually also be set to true in case that condition is fulfilled. Then make sure that this is actually also under this condition right there. So this must be true for this to be true, else we can actually make sure this is actually set to false. So if a user does not tap on this button, it actually remains as false. So that's actually what happens in that case. Test that again, and as you can see, when I click on this, it actually also become active, but as you can see, it remains active again, and then that means we actually have to set the other conditions. So let's add all the other different conditions. So add the second condition. So in the second condition, remember that everything else must be set to false for it to become inactive. So all these must be set to false. Click enter, and there we go. So if they're all set to false, we can actually now set the variable of the apply to false, or otherwise it will actually remain true. Drag this to the top, otherwise this will remain true. Right, so there we go. Test that one more time. As you can see, it becomes active. Then same thing here, and as you can see, if I leave one unchecked, it actually still works until both of them are off. So I'm going to do the same thing for each of these remaining ones, but I'm going to speed up the video, but just follow along. Right, so now that we've set all the variables, we can actually now close these. Now let's test that again. So let's test this. So when I actually click on this, you can actually see it becomes active. So it doesn't matter which one I actually click on, so I can actually select any of them randomly, and actually it should still work. So now that it's working, we're actually on the right track. So now next, I actually want to make sure that when a user clicks on this in its active state, that it will actually redirect them to the next frame. So let's work on that. Alright, so select this and then go to where you actually have your active right here. So inside active, actually make sure, so the inactive form, there's actually no interaction that the user can make, but inside the active there's going to be an interaction. So go and add an interaction, and then we're going to first set a condition. So the condition must first be that this apply must actually be set to true. So that must be true for that to actually work. So when that works, a user can navigate to frame 2, and that can happen as a smart animation. Then let's close that. And then lastly, I want to make sure that a user can actually click on this, go back to this main page. Let's add an interaction here. So add an interaction on tap, navigate to frame 1, as simple as that. So let's check this out one more time. So let's check the presentation. Alright, so our prototype has actually finally loaded, and as you can see, when a user clicks on this, this becomes active, and then I can actually apply and go to this next page. So let's go back, and as you can see, if none of them is actually selected, a user cannot apply. But if in case any is selected, I can actually apply. So let's try another option. How about when I have 3 of them selected, I will still be able to apply as long as this is actually made active. Alright, so that's it for today's video. If the video really helped you, feel free to give the video a thumbs up, and then tell me below in the comments if the video really helped you. And then if you're new to this channel, I encourage you to join the community by subscribing. Then make sure to hit the notification button so that you get updated every single time I upload a new video. Thank you so much for watching yet again. I'll see you in my next video.